You just bought something you didn't have the money for, and it felt completely fine. No guilt, no friction, just 4 easy payments and a confirmation email. The app made it feel responsible, almost, like you were being smart about it, spreading it out, managing it. But somewhere in the back of your mind, a number just got bigger, and you're not entirely sure what that number is anymore. That's where we need to start. Because if you're in your 20s right now, you are living through the most sophisticated debt experiment ever run on a generation. And the terrifying part is it doesn't feel like debt. It feels like options. Think about the last 3 months. Not the big purchases, the small ones. The sneakers you split into 4. The concert tickets you spread out. The skincare routine that became a subscription before you noticed. The furniture that seemed irresponsible not to finance because 0% interest is basically free money, right? You told yourself you were being strategic. And here's the thing, you're not wrong for thinking that. You were handed a tool and told it was a life hack. Nobody sat you down and explained what it was actually doing to your brain. Nobody showed you the math on the other side. You were too busy trying to keep up, stay afloat, look like you had it together. So you clicked confirm, again and again. And right now, if you added up every active buy now, pay later installment running in the background of your financial life, Afterpay, Klarna, Affirm, the store card you opened for the discount, what would that number actually be? Not the monthly payment, the total. Do you know it? Most people don't. That's not an accident. Here's what nobody tells you about how these platforms were designed. They weren't built for your convenience. They were built to collapse the moment between wanting something and owning it. That moment, that pause where you used to think, can I actually afford this? That moment was worth billions of dollars to retailers. And buy now, pay later killed it on purpose. Before, your credit card at least had one number. One balance you could look at and feel bad about. It was ugly, but it was visible. What these new platforms did was something more elegant and more dangerous. They fragmented your debt into pieces small enough that none of them feel real. $40 every 2 weeks doesn't feel like $160. Psychologically, it just doesn't. And they knew that when they built it. They called it financial inclusion. What it actually is friction removal. And when you remove friction from spending, people spend more. Not a little more. A lot more. A study tracked consumer spending behavior before and after BNPL adoption. Average order values went up by 30 to 50%. People weren't buying the same things more conveniently. They were buying things they wouldn't have bought at all. Because the pain of paying, and there is supposed to be a pain of paying, it's a feature, not a bug, had been quietly engineered away. You weren't being smart, you were being played. And the worst part is the people who designed this system are genuinely brilliant. Which means this isn't about willpower, it's about architecture. You were navigating a building specifically designed to make you get lost. But here's what nobody tells you about money when you're young. The most expensive thing you will ever buy is the lifestyle you build before you can actually afford it. Not the individual purchases, the pattern. Because here's how it works. You land your first real job. Maybe it's $40,000 a year, maybe it's $60,000. And for the first time in your life, you have actual money coming in every month. And your brain, which spent years in scarcity mode, exhales. It says, we made it. And without even deciding to, you start living like you made it. New apartment, better neighborhood, nicer clothes because you need to look the part now. Subscriptions that match the person you're becoming. A car that doesn't embarrass you. And you're not going into traditional debt for most of this. You're using installments. You're being responsible. You're spreading it out. What you don't realize is that you just made a decision that will shape the next decade of your financial life. Not because the individual purchases were wrong, because you established a baseline, and that baseline is now the floor. This is lifestyle inflation. And buy now, pay later is the most powerful lifestyle inflation engine ever created for people who don't think they're inflating their lifestyle. Because you never felt the moment you crossed the line. There was no moment. There were just 4 easy payments, dozens of them, running simultaneously, while you looked at your bank account and wondered where your money was going. And this is where it gets interesting, because the solution everyone will try to sell you is a budget. Track your spending. Use a spreadsheet. Download an app that tells you where every dollar went. And that's not wrong, exactly, but it's also not where the real problem lives. The real problem is identity. Think about the people you know who are genuinely good with money. Not rich necessarily, good with money, there's usually something slightly different about how they move through the world. They don't seem to be white-knuckling it. They don't seem to be making agonizing decisions at every turn. They just don't buy certain things. Not because they can't, because somewhere along the way they decided that buying that thing wasn't part of who they are. That's the gap most people never close. They try to manage their spending without ever examining their identity. And your identity right now, in your 20s, is being actively shaped by marketing systems that want it to trend in one very specific direction, toward consumption, toward the next thing, toward the version of yourself that needs more to feel like enough. Buy now, pay later didn't create that, but it poured gasoline on it, because now you don't even have to decide if you can afford the thing you want to become. You just split it into 4. Here's the first thing the people who actually build wealth in their 20s understand, and this is going to sound almost insultingly simple, but stay with it. Every payment you automate is a vote for who you're becoming, not a transaction, a vote. When you set up a recurring installment for something, you are telling your future self that this thing is part of your life now. You are baking it into your operating costs. And here's what's invisible about that. Your future self will have to actively decide to remove it, which means the default is that it stays. And humans don't remove defaults. We live inside them. The people who lose decades of wealth building don't do it in one catastrophic decision. They do it in 30 small, comfortable ones, each one reasonable, each one survivable, each one quietly compounding into a life where there's always just enough coming in and always just slightly more going out. The math on that is brutal if you actually run it. Take someone who carries an average of $300 a month in active BNPL installments between ages 22 and 30. That's not dramatic. That's probably conservative for someone living in any major city with a functional social life. $300 a month over 8 years is almost $30,000. But that's not the real number. The real number is what that $30,000 would have become if it had been doing something other than funding lifestyle. At a modest 8% average return in an index fund, you're looking at somewhere between $45,000 and $50,000. You didn't just spend $30,000. You spent $50,000. You just won't feel it for 15 years. And this is the part most people miss. The cost of buy now, pay later isn't the interest. A lot of these platforms genuinely charge 0 interest if you pay on time. The cost is the opportunity. The cost is the habit. The cost is the identity you're slowly, painlessly, conveniently constructing, one confirmation email at a time. Now let's talk about what's actually happening in your nervous system when you use these platforms, because this is the part that should make you angry. There's a concept in behavioral economics called present bias. It means human brains are wired to dramatically overvalue what we can have right now versus what we can have later. It's not a flaw exactly. It's ancient hardware running in a modern world. Our ancestors who grabbed the food in front of them survived longer than the ones who saved it. The problem is that instinct is catastrophically bad at navigating a world designed to exploit it. Buy now, pay later is a present bias machine. When you pay for something up front, your brain registers a loss in the moment. It feels like something leaving. Psychologists call this the pain of paying, and that pain acts as a natural brake on spending. It's uncomfortable, but it's protective. When you split a payment, that pain gets distributed across time until it effectively disappears. $40 in 2 weeks doesn't feel like a loss today. It feels like nothing today. And so your brain doesn't pump the brakes. It greenlights the purchase. And the company that designed the checkout flow knew exactly what it was doing when it put that option right there, in that color, with that phrasing, at that moment. You weren't making a free choice. You were making a choice inside a system specifically architected to produce that choice. Understanding that doesn't excuse every decision going forward, but it should permanently change how you feel when you see that option appear. Here's the second principle, and this one is harder to hear. Your financial life is not a math problem. It's a self-trust problem. Most people in their 20s have a complicated relationship with their own financial decisions. They've broken enough budgets, missed enough savings goals, spent enough money on things they later regretted that somewhere under the surface, they've stopped fully trusting themselves with money. And so they outsource the decision. They let the platform decide. They let the installment plan decide. They let the 0% for 12 months decide. Because if the structure makes the choice, then you're not really responsible for the outcome. This is the invisible logic underneath a lot of BNPL usage. It's not, I can't afford this. It's, I don't trust myself to make this decision clearly, so I'll let the payment plan make it manageable. And what feels like financial sophistication is actually financial avoidance, dressed in a user-friendly interface. The people who genuinely change their financial trajectory in their 20s don't find better tools. They rebuild the relationship. They start making small financial promises to themselves and keeping them. Not because the promises were big, because the keeping matters more than the amount. Because every time you follow through on what you said you'd do with money, you are depositing into a trust account with yourself. And that account compounds. And eventually you become someone who doesn't need the installment plan to make a decision feel safe. Because you trust the person making the decision. That shift is worth more than any financial product on the market. There's something darker underneath all of this that needs to be said directly. Buy now, pay later is predominantly being adopted by people between 18 and 34. That is not a coincidence. That is a target market. You are the target market. Not because you're foolish. Because you're at the exact life stage where identity is fluid, social comparison is intense, income is rising faster than financial literacy, and the desire to live like the version of yourself you're trying to become is at its absolute peak. They found you at the most vulnerable and lucrative moment of your financial life, and they handed you something that feels like freedom and functions like a cage. Because here's what a cage made of small, comfortable payments looks like 10 years from now. You're 32. You have a decent salary. On paper, you're doing well. But your fixed monthly obligations, rent, car, subscriptions, the student loans that never quite went away, and yes, still some installment payments because the habit never broke, eat 70% of your take-home before you make a single choice. You're not broke. You're trapped inside a lifestyle that costs exactly what you make. And you can't downgrade because this is just your life now. This is what your life costs. And you can't upgrade because there's no margin. There's never any margin. There's just the next paycheck and the obligations already waiting for it. That is not a dramatic scenario. That is the median financial reality of adults in their 30s right now. And most of them built it on a foundation of small, convenient, interest-free installments. The third principle is the one that will actually change something if you let it. The question is never, can I afford the payment? The question is, what does owning this cost me in freedom? This is how the people who build real financial independence think. Not about budgets, not about sacrifice, about cost in a different currency, not dollars, freedom, options, time. When you're deciding whether to split something into 4 payments, the real question isn't whether you can handle $40 every 2 weeks. Of course you can. The question is, what is the version of me 5 years from now paying for this decision right now? Is future me more free because of this? Or is future me carrying more weight, more obligation, fewer options? That is a completely different calculation, and it leads to completely different decisions. Not because you become a monk who never spends money, but because some purchases pass that test easily. And some purchases that felt completely reasonable suddenly look very different when you run them through that filter. A useful tool for your actual life, yes. Another item to perform a version of success you haven't earned yet? Probably not. The people who win this game in their 20s don't out-earn everyone else. They outthink the question. They stop asking if they can afford the payment and start asking if they can afford the identity the payment is building. So here's the uncomfortable truth you can't unhear after today. You are not making purchasing decisions. You are making identity decisions. Every time you open a BNPL app, you are voting for who you're going to be. And right now the vote is going towards someone who needs more than they have, who performs a life slightly beyond their means, who keeps their real financial situation slightly blurry because clarity would be uncomfortable. That person does not build wealth. That person builds the appearance of wealth. And those are not the same thing. They just look the same from the outside, which is exactly the problem. Your lifestyle right now is someone else's marketing strategy executing perfectly. The brands, the platforms, the payment processors, the retailers, they all get paid. You get the items and the installments and the carefully curated life, and eventually, if you don't interrupt the pattern, you get to 35 wondering where it all went. That's not inspiration. That's just projection. 5 years of small, manageable, convenient decisions, and here's where the math lands. So there are 2 paths forward from this moment, and neither of them is simple. That's important to understand. There's no clean version of this. The first path is the one you're already on. It's comfortable. It's familiar. The payments are manageable. The lifestyle is good. You look like you're doing well. And maybe you are. Maybe you'll earn enough that it all eventually balances out. Maybe you'll figure it out later. Later has worked so far, more or less. The second path is uncomfortable in a different way. It's not about deprivation. It's about clarity. It's about actually knowing your numbers. Actually feeling the full price of something before you buy it. Actually asking the harder question every time. And sitting with the answer even when the answer is no. Not because you can't afford the payment, because you've decided your future self deserves the margin. That path requires you to become someone slightly different than who you've been. Not dramatically, incrementally, one decision at a time, but differently. The question isn't whether you can change how you use these tools. You clearly can. The question is whether you're willing to give up the comfort of not knowing. The comfortable blur of managed payments and approximate awareness of where you stand. Because the blur feels safe. But it's not. It's just soft-edged. What do you actually want your financial life to look like at 30? At 35? Not the payments, the reality underneath them. Only you know if the path you're on gets there. Your move.